They tell you Alfred Rosenberg died quick, clean drop, broken neck, 1 minute breathing, next minute gone. That is not what happened. October 16th, 1946, Nuremberg Prison Gymnasium, 1:47 in the morning. And what unfolded in that room was far worse than any textbook wants you to believe. You need to understand something first. This was not just another Nazi. Rosenberg was not a camp guard or a middle manager pushing papers. He was the man who built the intellectual scaffolding for genocide. The architect of racial theory who gave Hitler philosophical cover. The ideologue who said the Nordic blood was sacred and everyone else was disposable. He wrote the second most important Nazi book after Mein Kampf, The Myth of the 20th Century, published in 1930. Over 1 million copies sold by 1944. The Catholic Church banned it in 1934 for scorning all Christian dogmas. Hitler himself called it mysticism and nonsense, but never stopped Rosenberg from spreading it, because useful lies do not need to be true. They just need to move people. Born January 12, 1893 in Reval, Estonia, then part of the Russian Empire, Baltic German, studied architecture in Riga and Moscow, fled the Russian Revolution in 1918, landed in Munich, met Dietrich Eckart. The poet turned propagandist. Through Eckart he found Hitler and Rudolf Hess, joined the German Workers' Party in early 1919, the group that became the Nazi Party. Hitler saw in Rosenberg something he could use, an intellectual who could dress up hate in academic language, make genocide sound like philosophy, make extermination sound like natural law. When the beer hall putsch collapsed in November 1923 and Hitler got arrested, he handed the party to Rosenberg, temporary leader. Hitler was not worried. Rosenberg was weak at politics, terrible with people. The party would not go anywhere without Hitler, and it did not. Rosenberg kept the flame alive but built nothing. When Hitler walked out of prison, he took the reins back and put Rosenberg where he belonged, writing, speaking, building the myth. If you value documented Nazi ideology and execution history like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum archives, including the Rosenberg Diary, recovered by Homeland Security in June 2013, trial transcripts from the Harvard Law School Nuremberg Trials Project, published between 1945 and 1946, and the International Military Tribunal judgment documents dated October 1st, 1946. Now back to the information. In 1930, Rosenberg was elected to the Reichstag, Nazi expert on foreign affairs. January 1933, Hitler became chancellor. Rosenberg got the Nazi Party Foreign Policy Office. 1934, he became Reichsleiter, part of the top Nazi leadership circle, and Hitler made him the delegate for supervising the entire spiritual and ideological training of the party. Think about that. Every Nazi being taught, every belief being shaped. Rosenberg was the gatekeeper of what it meant to think like a Nazi. His book laid it out plain. The Nordic race originated in Atlantis. Their nobility justified enslaving and murdering anyone not Aryan. Christianity was corrupted by Jewish and Semitic influences. The blood was everything. At page 479 of The Myth, he wrote that the essence of the contemporary world revolution lay in the awakening of racial types across the whole planet. At page 114, he wrote that a new faith was awakening, the myth of the blood. The belief that the divine being of mankind was to be defended with the blood, that Nordic blood constituted the mystery which had supplanted the old sacraments. Martin Bormann wrote to Rosenberg in 1940 saying, "The churches could not be conquered by compromise, but only through a new ideology whose coming Rosenberg had announced in his writings." The Nazi Book Review publication in November 1942 said that next to the Führer's book, the myth had contributed to a unique extent to the rise in the spiritual and physical development of the German people. But Rosenberg wanted more than words. He wanted power over things, real things, art, books, culture itself. January 1940. Hitler appointed him to set up the Hohe Schule, the Center of National Socialist Ideological and Educational Research. Out of that came the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg in 1940, the ERR, a looting machine, art, libraries, archives. Anything with cultural value in occupied Europe was fair game. France first, Belgium, Netherlands, then East, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Greece, Italy, Ukraine, Belarusia. Fall 1940. Hitler ordered Rosenberg to confiscate all Jewish art collections. Jews were stateless now. No property rights. Everything they owned was ownerless by a Nazi decree. The ERR and Rosenberg fell under Hermann Göring's authority. The Gestapo went door to door in Paris hunting for valuable pieces. The ERR was the most elaborate confiscating agency the Nazis built. They looted over 21,000 individual objects from more than 200 Jewish-owned collections. Every object delivered to the Jeu de Paume Museum got an inventory card. Artist name, medium, dimensions, often a photograph, meticulous record-keeping for mass theft. Then came the mobile action, M-action, furniture operation. December 1941, Rosenberg requested permission from Hitler to take furniture from Jewish homes no longer occupied. Approved December 31st, 1941. Spring 1942. The operation went full scale. The ERR looted approximately 70,000 homes of French, Belgian, and Dutch Jews who had fled or been deported. Paris alone, 38,000 homes stripped. A Parisian department store became interim storage before everything shipped to Germany. Document 1015BPS at Nuremberg contained a detailed account of the seizure of over 21,000 valuable art objects. Document 188 described the looting of the contents of over 71,000 Jewish homes, 26,984 railroad cars to transport the confiscated furnishings to Germany. The goal was to furnish German administrative offices in the occupied Eastern territories. Reality was bombed out. German families got most of it, but Rosenberg's real crimes were not about paintings or furniture. July 17, 1941. Hitler appointed him Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern territories, the supreme authority for vast stretches of conquered Soviet land, Ukraine, Belarusia, the Baltic states. Rosenberg attended Hitler's conference on July 16, 1941, where Hitler stated they were faced with the task of cutting up the giant cake according to their needs in order to dominate it, administer it, and exploit it. Ruthless action was discussed. Rosenberg accepted the appointment the next day. He knew what was coming. He helped formulate the policies: Germanization, exploitation, forced labor, extermination of Jews, extermination of opponents of Nazi rule. He set up the administration that carried them out. He directed that the Hague rules of land warfare were not applicable in the occupied Eastern territories. No protections, no limits. November 18, 1941, press conference. Rosenberg said some 6 million Jews still lived in the East, and this question could only be solved by a biological extermination of the whole of Jewry in Europe. The Jewish question would only be solved for Germany when the last Jew had left German territory, and for Europe when not a single Jew stood on the European continent as far as the Urals. To this end, it was necessary to force them beyond the Urals, or otherwise bring about their eradication. His ministry worked with Fritz Sauckel on forced labor. Document 018PS, a letter Rosenberg wrote to Sauckel on December 21, 1942. He thanked Sauckel for the report on the execution of the Great Task, and said he was glad that Sauckel always found the necessary support, even from civilian authorities in the occupied Eastern territories. Both he and Sauckel had represented the same viewpoints from the beginning on the solution of the labor problem in the East. As late as July 11, 1944, a letter from Alfred Meyer, Rosenberg's deputy interpreting, was doesn't. To Sauckel showed the ministry was still urging action on forced labor despite the retreat from the East. Rosenberg did not overlook opportunities to put his anti-Semitic beliefs into practice. He recommended that instead of executing 100 Frenchmen as retaliation for attempts on lives of Wehrmacht members, there should be executed 100 Jewish bankers, lawyers, etc. Document 001PS. The recommendation was made to awaken anti-Semitic sentiment. The numbers pile up. Our teams in the Wehrmacht visited 375 archival institutions, 402 museums, 531 institutes, and 957 libraries in Eastern Europe alone, searching for research materials. 100,000 geographical maps taken on ideological grounds. In France, 81 libraries looted in Paris by March 1941. A supplemental list showed another 30 libraries of Jewish, Masonic, Socialist, and émigré collections seized. The Alliance Israelite Universelle in Paris had built a new library in 1937 with an 8-story tower and reading room boasting 50,000 books. By March 1946, 147 crates of books removed from the AIU and 243 crates from the SIF. May 19, 1945, Allied troops captured Rosenberg in Flensburg-Murik. He was tried at Nuremberg, International Military Tribunal, November 20th, 1945 to October 1st, 1946. 216 court sessions. Rosenberg was found guilty on all 4 counts: conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning, initiating, and waging wars of aggression, war crimes, crimes against humanity. The final judgment named him one of the principal planners of the invasion of Norway and the invasion of the Soviet Union. It held him directly responsible for the systematic plunder of the occupied countries of Europe and the brutal conditions in Eastern Europe. During the trial, Rosenberg said he was ignorant of the Holocaust. This was a lie. His deputy Alfred Meyer and Georg Leibrandt from his ministry attended the Wannsee Conference on January 20th, 1942, where the final solution was coordinated. Rosenberg's own November 18, 1941 press conference statement about biological extermination proved he knew. The prosecution presented document after document, letters, orders, speeches. His own handwritten diary covering 1936 through 1944 was recovered and used as evidence. 425 loose-leaf pages. He had been there. He had signed off. He had pushed forward. The prosecutors aimed to show that Rosenberg was not just a theorist. He was an enabler, an administrator, a man who turned words into death. The American prosecution drew on Office of Strategic Services reports and information from the Eyewitness Institute for Jewish Research and the American Jewish Committee. The French prosecution presented documents from the Center of Contemporary Jewish Documentation. 37 witnesses called by the prosecution compared to 83 for the defense. 19 defendants testified on their own behalf, including Rosenberg. He tried to distance himself, claimed he protested on occasion, not out of humanitarian reasons, but on grounds of political expediency. Tried to place blame on other agencies and other defendants. It did not work. October 1st, 1946, afternoon. The International Military Tribunal delivered its verdicts. 12 of the original 24 defendants sentenced to death by hanging. Martin Bormann tried in absentia. Hermann Göring also sentenced to death, but he cheated the gallows. Night of October 15th, hours before execution. Göring bit down on a cyanide capsule concealed in a copper cartridge shell while lying on a cot in his cell, dead 2 hours before his scheduled drop. That left 10 men for the rope: Joachim von Ribbentrop, Wilhelm Keitel, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Wilhelm Frick, Fritz Sockel, Alfred Jodl, Arthur Seyss, in court, Julius Streicher. The executioner was Master Sergeant John Clarence Woods, 43 years old, short, chunky, from San Antonio, Texas. Woods claimed 15 years as executioner with 347 hangings under his belt. Time magazine credited him with that number. Later research showed it was inflated. Closer to 60 to 70 executions over 2 years was more credible. Woods had a history. Born June 5th, 1911 in Wichita, Kansas, joined the Navy December 3rd, 1929. When absent without leave within months, convicted at general court-martial, examined by a psychiatric board April 23rd, 1930, diagnosed with constitutional psychopathic inferiority without psychosis, found to be obviously poor service material, discharged. He drifted. Construction jobs, farm work, Great Depression years. Then World War II started. Woods enlisted in the Army in August 1943, assigned to Company B, 37th Engineer Combat Battalion, 5th Engineer Special Brigade. Likely participated in D-Day landings at Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. When the Army posted recruitment for experienced executioners in autumn 1944, Woods threw his name in. He lied, said he had hung 2 criminals in Texas and 2 in Oklahoma. Both states had switched to electrocution during the period Woods claimed to be a hangman. The Army never verified his claims. They needed a volunteer. Woods was willing. His hangings were disasters. Before Nuremberg, Woods participated in at least 11 bungled hangings of UMS soldiers between 1944 and 1946. He also executed about 45 war criminals at various locations: Rheinbach, Bruchsal, Landsberg, Nuremberg, May 28th and 29th, 1946. 14 men convicted of Dachau concentration camp atrocities hanged over 2 days. Then Gerstenberg, Justus Gerstenberg, 49-year-old painter, policeman, father of 4, hanged for murder of U.S. Airman Sergeant Willard M. Holden. Gerstenberg was hit in the face during the drop, broke his jaw, lost several teeth. The massive trapdoor weighing over 100 kilograms hit him. This did not stop Woods' superiors from sending him to Nuremberg for the main event. Lieutenant Stanley Tills was charged with coordinating the Nuremberg hangings. Tills saw Woods at work in Landsberg, picked him for the job. Woods built the 3 gallows in the Nuremberg prison gymnasium, painted them olive green, stretched the ropes. On October 15, 1946, at 2 in the afternoon, Woods demonstrated the execution process to Russian delegates. The next day, he would hang 10 Nazi officials. Göring had jumped the line with cyanide. The remaining 10 would face Woods and his assistant military policeman, Joseph Malta. The gymnasium was approximately 33 feet wide by 80 feet long. plaster walls with visible cracks, 3 black-painted wooden scaffolds inside. 2 would be used in alternating order. 1 held in reserve. 13 steps to each gallows platform. The method was standard drop, not the long drop favored by British executioners. Standard drop meant shorter distance. Shorter distance meant necks often did not break clean. Men strangled instead, slow, agonizing. The British executioner Albert Pierrepoint later criticized the American cowboy-style noose hangings, said he could have done it better. Pierrepoint had a 100% success record. Quick deaths, broken necks. Woods did not. For their last meal, the condemned men got sausage and cold cuts, potato salad, black bread, tea to drink. Not much of a final feast, but that was not the point. October 16th, 1946, shortly after 1 in the morning, the executions began. Joachim von Ribbentrop first. Hitler's foreign minister, 1:11 a.m. He entered the gymnasium. All officers, official witnesses, and correspondents rose to attention. Ribbentrop's manacles removed. He mounted the 13 steps on the platform, asked if he had any last words. He said his final wish was that Germany realize its unity and that an understanding be reached between East and West. He wished peace to the world. The black hood raised over his head, noose tightened. 1:14 a.m. The trap opened with a loud bang. He dropped. The rope suddenly taut, swinging back and forth, creaking audibly. Witnesses heard no sound from within. At 1:26 a.m., 12 minutes after the trap opened, Ribbentrop was pronounced dead. 12 minutes. Not a quick broken neck. Strangulation. Wilhelm Keitel, neck field marshal. Perfectly pressed uniform. Polished boots. He climbed the scaffold like a rostrum. 1:38 a.m. He stood on the trap. Asked for last words, he said more than 2 million German soldiers went to their death for the fatherland before him, and he followed now his sons, all for Germany. The hood, the noose, the drop. Witnesses said Keitel's body thrashed. The rope creaked and swung. At 1:44 a.m., Keitel pronounced dead. His death struggle took about 24 minutes, according to some accounts. When guards removed his body 3 minutes later and made ready for the next man, photographs later showed Keitel's face battered and bloody. Not the injuries of a clean drop. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, once head of Nazi security police, tall, heavy. He entered at 1:46 a.m. On the gallows, he said he had loved his German people and my fatherland with a warm heart. He had done his duty by the laws of his people. He regretted that German crimes were committed in which he had no part. Germany and her people had a right to a fair trial. Black hood, drop. 1:52 a.m., pronounced dead. Another long wait. Another man hanging, swinging, strangling. 1:54 a.m. The scaffold made ready for Alfred Rosenberg, dull and sunken-cheeked as he looked around the court. Complexion, pasty brown. He did not appear nervous. Walked with a steady step to and up the gallows. Apart from giving his name and replying no to a question as to whether he had anything to say, he did not utter a word. Despite his avowed atheism, he was accompanied by a Protestant chaplain who followed him to the gallows and stood beside him praying. Rosenberg looked at the chaplain once. Expressionless. No emotion, no last statement, nothing. The hood came down. The noose tightened. The trap opened. 90 seconds after he was swinging from the end of a hangman's rope, 1:56:30 a.m., Rosenberg pronounced dead. 90 seconds. The swiftest execution of the 10, but do not mistake speed for mercy. 90 seconds is an eternity when you're choking at the end of a rope. Your windpipe crushed, blood unable to reach your brain, vision darkening, body convulsing, heart hammering against ribs until it cannot hammer anymore. What the official accounts do not say loud enough is this. Woods used the standard drop method deliberately. British executioners like Pierrepoint calculated drop distance based on the condemned man's weight and build. Proper calculation meant instant death. Neck snapped at the second or third cervical vertebra. Spinal cord severed. Unconsciousness immediate. Death within seconds. Woods did not do that. The drops at Nuremberg were too short. Reports indicated some executions took from 14 to 28 minutes. The army denied claims that the drop length was too short or that the condemned died from strangulation instead of broken neck. But photographs do not lie. Battered faces, bloody noses torn off. In Julius Streicher's case, witnesses heard him groaning after the initial drop was not fatal. Woods came down from the platform and disappeared behind the black curtain concealing the dying man. Abruptly, the groans ceased and the rope stopped moving. Witnesses were convinced Woods had grabbed Streicher and pulled down hard, strangling him. According to Lieutenant Tills, Woods had deliberately placed the coils of Stryker's noose off-center to ensure he would not experience a quick death. Cecil Catling, a veteran crime reporter and expert on hangings, was there. He declared the hangings had been cruelly bungled. Not enough room for the men to drop. Necks had not been properly broken. They must have died of slow strangulation. He claimed they were not properly tied, so that some hit the platform with their heads as they went down and their noses were torn off. The U.S. Army denied his story. But the photographs of Wilhelm Frick and Wilhelm Keitel showed battered and bloody faces. Hard to deny what you can see. Wood said afterward he never saw a hanging go off any better. Said the assignment at Nuremberg was one he really wanted to do. He insisted on remaining in Germany rather than returning home. He also claimed he received a $2,500 offer from a man in Havana, Cuba, for one of the ropes used during the executions, although the ropes, hoods, and other items had already been burned. He described the Nazis as arrogant men who really deserved hanging. He also claimed they had died bravely. But what does bravely mean when you are at the end of a rope that was measured wrong? When your neck does not break and you spend minutes choking, vision blurring, lungs screaming for air that will not come, heart pounding slower and slower until it stops? That is not bravery. That is agony stretched out. Whether Woods was incompetent or deliberately sadistic remains debated. His pattern of bungled hangings before Nuremberg suggests incompetence. His boasting afterward and the accounts from witnesses like Tills suggest something darker. Intent, revenge dressed as duty. Hans Frank next, former Governor General of Poland, 2:05 a.m. He seemed the least steady, stumbled on the 13th step of the gallows. His only words were, "Long live eternal Germany," before he was hooded and dropped through the trap. Wilhelm Frick after him, 2:11 a.m., Interior Minister. His face would later show the brutality of the drop. Julius Stryker made his melodramatic appearance at 2:12 a.m. Publisher of Der Stürmer, the most vicious anti-Semitic newspaper in Nazi Germany. While his manacles were being removed and his bare hands bound, he glanced at the 3 wooden scaffolds, glanced around the room, eyes resting momentarily on the small group of witnesses. Then he was swung suddenly to face them. He glared, suddenly screamed Purim Fest, 1946. Purim is the Jewish holiday celebrated in spring commemorating the execution of Haman, ancient persecutor of Jews in the Old Testament. When asked if he had any last words, Stryker shouted, "The Bolsheviks will hang you one day." When the black hood was raised over his head, his muffled voice said, "Adele, my dear wife." The trap opened with a loud bang. He went down kicking. When the rope snapped taut with the body swinging wildly, groans could be heard from within the concealed interior of the scaffold. Woods descended from the gallows platform, lifted the black canvas curtain, went inside. The groans stopped. The rope stopped moving. Fritz Sockel, boss of slave labor, Alfred Jodl, Colonel General, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, former Gauleiter of Holland and Austria, all hanged in sequence. The last man pronounced dead at 2:45 a.m. 10 men in 103 minutes. Woods told the Sioux City Journal on October 19, 1946, that was fast work. He said he used a different rope and a different hood on each man, fixed the nooses and stretched the ropes himself to make sure nothing would go wrong. But things did go wrong, or they went exactly as Woods intended. The bodies were photographed, clinical documentation, then they were removed. A convoy drove them from Nuremberg to Munich, Ostfriedhof Cemetery. There they were cremated, all 10 executed men, plus Hermann Göring's body. The ashes scattered in the river Isar. No graves, no markers, no shrines. The goal was to prevent any legend from growing, any place where sympathizers could gather. Scattered ashes in a river, anonymous, gone. Time magazine published a report, October 28, 1946, The Night Without Dawn. Allegedly at the very moment prison commotion from Göring's suicide began, near the old imperial castle in Nuremberg, a group of German children hung an image of Göring. They burned the improvised figure and silently walked around the fire, watching it cast strange shadows among the ruins. Prison psychologist Gustave Gilbert, whose long watch and surveillance of the defendants finally ended, wrote in his diary the day after the executions. He asked one of the German lawyers what the German people were thinking about this end of the Third Reich. The lawyer thought a while, then said, "To tell you the truth, they think whatever you want them to think." Rosenberg's diary, which had gone missing after the trials, was eventually recovered. On June 13, 2013, after a lengthy investigation by the United States Department of Homeland Security, it was found in Lewiston, New York. Written on 425 loose-leaf pages with entries from 1936 through 1944, now property of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Dr. Robert M. Kempner, a German lawyer who fled Germany for the United States during the war, served as deputy chief counsel and chief prosecutor in the ministry's case at Nuremberg. He had access to seized Nazi documents in his official capacity. After the trials, the diary went missing along with other material given to Kempner. He had taken documents back to his home against standard government procedure. Illegal. The diary remained missing for decades until the Homeland Security investigation tracked it down. Sarah J. Bloomfield, director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, said when the diary was recovered that as the museum built the collection of record on the Holocaust, having material documenting the actions of both perpetrators and victims was crucial to helping scholars understand how and why the Holocaust happened. The story of this diary demonstrated how much material remained to be collected, and why rescuing this evidence was such an important priority. The diary entries could provide historians with previously unknown information regarding the planning for the Nazi racial state, mass murder of Jewish people, planning and conduct of World War II, and the occupation of Soviet territory. Rosenberg was privy to much of it. His notes recorded meetings, conferences with Hitler and others, details about the conspiracy to dominate Russia and preparations for occupation in April 1941 before the attack even began. Woods died July 21st, 1950. He was working on Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands, part of the Pacific Proving Grounds used by the United States for nuclear testing. While changing a light bulb and standing in a pool of water, Woods was electrocuted. The island was frequented by German scientists and engineers as part of Operation Paperclip, the covert program bringing Nazi scientists to America to develop technological advancements. 4 years after he hanged 10 Nazis, Woods died on an island where former enemies of his country worked for his government. Irony or justice depends on how you see it. The story does not end with scattered ashes in a river. Justice is not a single event, a single night of retribution in a prison gymnasium. The execution of 10 men and the suicide of another was the closing of a chapter, not the end of the book. The intellectual scaffolding Alfred Rosenberg built, the vast machinery of the state he helped steer, had foundations too deep and tentacles too long to be severed by a hangman's rope. What followed was not a clean slate, but a long, messy, and incomplete reckoning, a reckoning that unfolded in courtrooms, in the cold silence of a fortress prison, and in the dusty archives and salt mines of a ruined continent. While Rosenberg and the others met their end, 7 of their co-defendants from the International Military Tribunal began a different kind of sentence. Not the quick finality of the drop, but the slow, grinding erosion of time. They were the men condemned to live, transferred under heavy guard in July 1947 to Spandau Prison, a grim, red-brick fortress in the British sector of a divided Berlin. This prison would become their world, a microcosm of the Cold War, jointly administered by the 4 Allied powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. The guard duty rotated monthly, a constant, tangible reminder of the coalition that had brought their Reich to ruin. The 7 prisoners of Spandau were a cross-section of the Nazi elite. Walter Funk, the Reichsbank president, sentenced to life. Erich Raeder and Karl Dönitz, the Grand Admirals of the German Navy, sentenced to life and 10 years respectively. Baldur von Schirach, the Hitler Youth leader, and Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and minister of armaments, both received 20 years. Konstantin von Neurath, the former foreign minister, received 15 years. And then there was Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy, the man who flew to Scotland in 1941. Sentenced to life in prison, he would become Spandau's most famous and its final inmate. Life inside was a study in monotonous rigidity. The rules were designed to crush the ego, to strip away the grandeur these men once commanded. They were numbers, not names. Hess was prisoner number 7. Speer was prisoner number 5. Their cells were stark, a bed, a table, a chair, a toilet, no personal effects. Their days were regimented: wake up at 6, wash, clean their cells, breakfast, then work. They tended a large garden within the prison walls, a patch of cultivated earth that became the central stage for their interactions and their isolation. They were forbidden from speaking to one another without permission, a rule often bent but never officially broken. They read books from the prison library, carefully censored. They were allowed 1 letter a week, no more than 1,300 words. Albert Speer, the architect of monumental visions, spent 2 decades pulling weeds and growing vegetables. He embarked on a meticulous campaign to maintain his sanity and rehabilitate his image. He walked every day. He walked circles around the garden, calculating the distance. He imagined a journey, a walk from Berlin to Heidelberg. He kept track of the kilometers over his 20 years. His imaginary trek took him around the world. He also wrote secretly, on toilet paper, on calendar pages, on any scrap he could find, thousands of pages, smuggled out by a sympathetic Dutch orderly. These notes would become his best-selling memoirs, Inside the Third Reich, a carefully constructed narrative that painted him as the apolitical technocrat, the good Nazi, who was seduced by Hitler but ignorant of the Holocaust's true horror. It was a masterful piece of self-exoneration that would shape public perception for decades. A lie built on the foundation of his intimate proximity to the very center of power. Rudolf Hess, by contrast, descended into a different kind of existence, paranoid, hypochondriacal, and increasingly isolated. He refused family visits for over 2 decades. He complained of stomach pains, claimed his food was poisoned, and spent long periods in a state of apparent amnesia. Was it madness or performance? The question was debated by his guards and psychiatrists for 40 years. He was the ghost of the Third Reich, a living relic locked away while the world outside changed beyond recognition. As the others served their time and were released, Neurath in 1954, Dönitz in 1956, Rader and Funk in 1957, Chirac and Speer in 1966, Hess remained. From October 1966 until his death, he was the sole prisoner of Spandau, a fortress maintained by 4 world powers at enormous expense for just one old man. He died on August 17, 1987, at the age of 93. The official verdict was suicide by hanging, using an electrical cord in a summer house in the prison garden, a verdict his family and supporters would contest for years, fueling conspiracy theories. After his death, Spandau prison was swiftly demolished, razed to the ground to prevent it from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. The rubble was ground to dust and scattered in the North Sea. Another attempt to erase a physical legacy, another effort to prevent the growth of a myth. But the main trial at Nuremberg, the one that condemned Rosenberg and sent Hess to Spandau, was only the beginning of the legal reckoning. It was case number 1. There were 12 more, between 1946 and 1949, in the same Palace of Justice. The United States military conducted a series of subsequent tribunals against the second tier of the Nazi hierarchy. These were the trials that delved deeper into the specific machinery of the state, exposing the complicity of doctors, lawyers, industrialists, and generals. The first of these subsequent trials, officially United States of America versus Karl Brandt et al., became known as the Doctors' Trial. It laid bare a world of medical barbarism that defied imagination. 23 German physicians and administrators were charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity for their role in horrific human experiments. The evidence presented was sickening. Prisoners in Dachau submerged in ice water to study hypothermia for the Luftwaffe. Their deaths meticulously timed and recorded. Inmates at Buchenwald infected with typhus to test vaccines. Gypsies at Ravensbrück having their bones broken and transplanted to study regeneration. Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz forced to drink only seawater to test methods of desalination. The chief defendant, Karl Brandt, was Hitler's personal physician and the Reich Commissioner for Health and Sanitation. He, along with others, argued they were acting under orders, conducting legitimate medical research for the good of the state. The tribunal rejected these arguments. On August 20th, 1947, 16 of the doctors were found guilty. 7 were sentenced to death by hanging. The trial led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code, a landmark document in the history of medical ethics, establishing the principle of informed consent for all human experimentation. Then came the trial that followed the blood trail directly back to Rosenberg's domain, the Einsatzgruppen trial, case number 9. The defendants were 24 leaders of the Schutzstaffel, SS Einsatzgruppen, the mobile death squads that operated behind the front lines in Eastern Europe. These were not the administrators of distant camps. These were the commanders of the men who rounded up Jews, partisans, and intellectuals in towns and villages across Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic states, marched them to pits and ravines, and shot them. Day after day. This was the Holocaust by bullets. The chief defendant, Otto Ohlendorf, was the commander of Einsatzgruppe D, which operated in southern Ukraine. On the witness stand, he was calm, articulate, a university-educated economist. He spoke without emotion, like a manager reporting on production quotas. He corrected the prosecutor on the number of people his unit had murdered. It was not 90,000, he clarified. It was approximately 100,000. He explained the methodology. To be more humane to his soldiers and to the victims, he ordered that victims be shot in the back of the neck in small groups, rather than being forced to witness mass executions. He described the special trucks his unit used, vehicles designed to pump carbon monoxide into the sealed rear compartment, gassing the occupants as they were driven to their burial pits. His testimony was a chilling portrait of bureaucratic mass murder, the absolute disconnect between the act and any sense of morality. The trial concluded in April 1948. All 24 defendants were convicted. 14 were sentenced to death. Only 4 were ultimately executed. Many others had their sentences commuted in the early 1950s. As the political priorities of the West shifted from denazification to confronting the Soviet Union in the Cold War, parallel to this legal pursuit, another mission was underway, a mission to reclaim a civilization's stolen soul. This was the legacy of Rosenberg's other great project, the Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, the ERR. His looting machine had plundered a continent. When the war ended, Europe's cultural treasures were scattered, hidden, and in danger of being lost forever. In the salt mines of Altusee in Austria, Allied forces discovered a breathtaking hoard, over 6,500 paintings, including masterpieces like the Ghent altarpiece by the Van Eyck brothers and Vermeer's The Astronomer. There were sculptures, tapestries, rare books, and furniture. This was Hitler's collection for his planned Führer Museum in Linz. In other mines, like Merker's in Germany, they found the bulk of the Reichsbank's gold reserves alongside countless works of art. The task of finding and recovering these treasures fell to a special unit of the Allied armies, the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Program, popularly known as the Monuments Men. A small group of about 350 men and women, mostly art historians, curators, and architects. They were tasked with the greatest treasure hunt in history. They followed paper trails through bombed-out offices, interrogated former Nazi officials, and ventured deep underground into booby-trapped mines. They found art hidden in castles, monasteries, and remote farmhouses. They cataloged every piece, from Michelangelo's Bruges Madonna to thousands of church bells stolen from across Europe. Their work was painstaking and perilous. They established collection points, like the one in Munich, where they began the monumental task of restitution, returning the art to its rightful owners or countries. But for countless pieces, the rightful owners were dead. Entire families had been wiped out, their collections ownerless in the eyes of the law. Jewish families had their possessions systematically cataloged and seized by Rosenberg's ERR in the Mobile action. For these objects, the path home was fraught with legal and moral complexities. Many pieces ended up in museums around the world, their dark provenance hidden or forgotten. Others disappeared into private collections. The story of looted art did not end in 1945. It continues to this day. In 2012, German authorities investigating a tax case stumbled upon a Munich apartment belonging to an elderly recluse named Cornelius Gurlitt. Inside, they found over 1,500 works of art, including pieces by Picasso, Matisse, and Chagall that were long thought to be lost. His father, Hildebrand Gurlitt, had been one of the 4 art dealers authorized by the Nazis to trade in degenerate art. The discovery was a bombshell, a direct link back to the Nazi looting machine, and it reignited the global effort to trace stolen art and provide long overdue justice to the heirs of the victims. Each painting found, each book returned, is a small victory against the cultural annihilation Rosenberg envisioned. The threads of this history are long and tangled, the death of an executioner by electrocution on a remote Pacific atoll, the 40-year imprisonment of a lone Nazi in a Berlin fortress, the chilling, bureaucratic confessions of mass murderers, the decades-long search for a stolen masterpiece. Each is a consequence, an echo of the ideology put into practice by men like Alfred Rosenberg. He did not build the gas chambers with his own hands, but he drafted the intellectual blueprints. He did not personally pull the trigger at the edge of the pit, but he wrote the policies that sent the executioners east. He did not strip the paintings from the walls himself, but he created the agency that institutionalized theft on a continental scale. The verdict at Nuremberg declared that his crimes were not merely theoretical. His words were weapons. His ideas were authorizations for murder. The swiftness of his death, that 90-second drop in the prison gymnasium, stands in stark contrast to the slow, enduring poison of his legacy, a poison that the world is still working to purge, one reclaimed painting, one survivor's testimony, one history lesson at a time. The work is not finished. It may never be,